She had no tears left to give. Her body was battered, her clothes torn to rags, her skin scraped and bruised. But none of those wounds cut as deep as the one inside her chest. Sarah Quinn was only 24. Yet in a single night, she had lost every bit of trust she ever held for the people who were supposed to protect her. Her brother-in-law, Caleb, had promised her work in a nearby town, a job that would bring in enough money to help her and her sister, Emily, survive the hard winter ahead. She had believed him. She had walked out into the night, thinking she was on her way toward hope. But it had all been a lie, a dirty, heartless trick. Caleb had not led her toward honest work. He had sold her like livestock to a man named Victor Crow, a trafficker whose name was whispered in fear. And worst of all, Emily had believed every word her husband said. She had not questioned. She had not stood up for Sarah. She had turned her back and walked away, leaving her sister in the hands of a monster. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Dragged through the night, Sarah had been beaten and tied, shoved into the back of a wagon. Every bone in her body throbbed with pain. Her knees were raw and bleeding from when she threw herself out of the wagon in a desperate bid to escape. Her shoulder was torn from the hard fall against the dirt road. Blood soaked her hip where the ground had ripped her open. But still she ran. She ran because the fire of betrayal burned hotter than any fire of pain. Hours later, she stumbled across the open plain. The dry grass sliced her bare feet as she staggered forward, each step heavier than the last. The sun blazed above her, merciless, cooking her skin and burning into the white shirt that clung to her like a wet rag. Her breath rasped in her throat, her vision swimming in and out. And then she saw him, a lone rider on horseback at the edge of a ranch gate. Her broken mind screamed only one thought, that he was another buyer, another devil dressed as a man. Her legs gave out. She collapsed face first in the dirt, the last of her strength draining away. Her lips split as she tried to speak, her voice little more than a broken whisper. Please, just make it quick. She expected the flash of a pistol. She expected the end. But instead, there was only silence. The horse stopped. The man climbed down, and then he froze. Jack Hale had seen plenty of death in his time. He had once carried a badge, a lawman both feared and respected across the frontier. But that life had ended years ago, the night his wife and little boy were murdered as revenge for a case he couldn't close. He had buried his badge with them and sworn never again to lift a gun in the name of justice. Since then, he had lived alone, tucked away on his ranch, far from the law and far from bloodshed. But now, here at his gate, lay a young woman begging for death. Her wrists tied raw, her body broken, her spirit shattered. For the first time in years, Jack felt his hands tremble, not from fear but from fury. He threw down his revolver. He dropped to his knees beside her. With a quick slash of his knife, he cut the rope that dug deep into her wrists. He pulled the red bandana from his neck and pressed it against the wound on her hip, try to slow the bleeding. Then, without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms. Her head fell limp against his chest, her breath shallow, her words long gone. She had begged him to kill her, but Jack Hale knew there was nothing quick about what had been done to her. What had been done wasn't a crime of chance. It was betrayal, cruelty, and the darkest form of slavery. And he could not turn away. Jack stood frozen at his own doorstep, holding the weight of the broken young woman who had shattered the silence of his exile. He had sworn to never fight again, but could he really turn his back now? What kind of torment drove someone so young to beg for death? And what would it cost him to take her inside? The smell of horse sweat and dust lingered in the air as Jack carried Sarah across the threshold of his ranch house. Her head rested against his chest, light as a feather but heavy with sorrow. He laid her down gently on a bench near the water trough, filled a tin cup, and pressed it to her lips. Her cracked mouth trembled when the cold water touched it, but she drank like someone crawling out of a desert. With each swallow, a trace of color returned to her pale cheeks, but the tears swimming in her eyes told him the deepest wounds weren't the ones he could see. For a long while, Jack said nothing. Silence had been his companion for so many years It was easier than speaking. But finally, when Sarah found her voice, it came out sharp and broken, like glass. My own kin sold me, she whispered, each word heavier than the last. My sister's husband promised me honest work, and she believed him. She believed every lie. They handed me over to a man who buys and sells women like cattle. Jack's jaw tightened. The red bandana, now stained dark, hung heavy in his hands. He had seen plenty of cruelty in his day, but betrayal by blood cut deeper than any outlaw's knife. Sarah tried to rise, but her body dragged her back down. She wrapped her arms tight around herself, as though trying to hide from his eyes. "It's not just the beating," she murmured. "It's knowing I was worth nothing more than a coin to them." Even my own sister turned away. Jack lowered himself so his tired eyes met hers. His voice was steady, but gentle. "You are not nothing," he said. "You made it here, didn't you? You fought to live when others wanted you gone." For the first time, a faint spark flickered in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but something close. She had been treated like an object, but here, on Jack's ranch, someone was treating her like a person again. The lantern on the wall flickered softly, throwing shadows across the rough wooden walls of the ranch house. Jack sat at the edge of the table, his hands resting still, watching Sarah with quiet eyes. She was wrapped in the clean cotton shirt he had given her, though it hung loose over her frame. Her shoulders trembled beneath the fabric, and her fingers clutched at the sleeves, as if holding them tight might somehow stitch her broken world back together. For years, Jack had lived in silence, speaking only to his horse and the wind. Now across from him sat a young woman who had been through more in a single night than most could survive in a lifetime. She nibbled at the piece of bread he'd set down, each bite slow, as if every swallow dragged a memory back into her chest. The silence between them was heavy, no longer comforting the way it had always been for him. It pressed down on them both, begging to be broken. Jack's voice was rough when he finally spoke. "I know the man who had you," he said quietly. Sarah's hand froze halfway to her mouth. She lowered the bread and stared at him, her eyes narrowing. "Victor Crow," Jack continued. "He's been buying and selling flesh since before you were born. I tried once to put him behind bars." He leaned back, the lamplight throwing hard shadows over his face. "Back then, I was a lawman. I carried a badge. Thought justice was strong enough to stop men like him. But I was wrong. My failure cost me my family." His hand twitched, and for a moment he saw the faces of his wife and son as clear as the day they were taken from him. His jaw clenched. "Since then, I swore I'd never fight again." The air in the room tightened. Sarah sat straighter, her bruised face turned toward him, her eyes sharp despite her exhaustion. "So, you'll turn me away too?" Her voice cracked, but her stare was steady. Jack didn't answer right away. He looked at the small drawer across the room, the one he hadn't touched in more than a decade. Slowly, he opened it. The old badge lay inside, dulled and scarred, a reminder of the life he had buried. He lifted it into the lamplight, the metal catching the glow for a heartbeat before he closed his hand around it. "No," he said at last. "I won't turn you away. But if we're to face Victor, we can't fight him with bullets alone. Men like him don't just fall from a gunshot. They slip through unless the law has proof." Sarah blinked at him, her lips trembling. "Proof?" Jack nodded. His voice carried the patience of a man who had hunted outlaws before. "The doctor in town will record your wounds. The ropes, the torn clothes, every mark they left on you, it'll all be kept. I'll send word to an old marshal I trust. But we won't chase Victor. We'll make him come to us." Her brows pulled tight. "And how would you do that?" Jack leaned forward, his weathered hands flat on the table. "With bait. Horses so rare a man like Victor won't resist." Sarah leaned back, her chest rising with an unsteady breath. For the first time since she stumbled onto his land, she saw not just a rancher, but the man Jack Hale had once been. A man who had tried to bury his past, but could not bury the fire in his chest. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, silence filled the room again, though it was no longer the same kind of silence. This time it was not empty, it was heavy with purpose. Outside, the coyotes cried across the plain, their howls carried on the cold night wind. Sarah pulled the cotton shirt tighter against her body. She still felt the chains, even though they were gone. She still felt her sister's betrayal pressing like a stone inside her chest. And yet, sitting here across from this man, she felt something else too. A fragile thread of safety, something she hadn't felt in so long she had nearly forgotten it existed. Jack poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of her, and sat back down. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Sarah broke the silence with a whisper so soft it was nearly lost to the crackle of the lantern. They said I belonged to him. Her voice shook. They signed a contract, like I was a mule. Even my own sister watched him take me. Jack's jaw flexed. His fingers gripped the coffee cup hard enough to whiten his knuckles. Paper doesn't own a person, he said flatly. And a sister who turns her back doesn't make you any less than who you are. Tears burned behind Sarah's eyes, though she refused to let them fall. She stared down at her hands, scarred wrists trembling as she rubbed them together. For the first time, she whispered, "Then why do I feel like I'm nothing?" Jack leaned across the table, his voice low but certain. "Because they wanted you to feel that way. But you aren't nothing. You're still here. You fought. That makes you more than they'll ever be." The words hung between them, filling the cracks left by silence. Sarah met his gaze, and though trust was still far off, a spark of something, maybe strength, maybe hope, flickered behind her tired eyes. 2 broken souls sat in the glow of a lantern, one carrying the scars of the past, the other carrying the wounds of betrayal. And for the first time, neither was alone in the dark. The night had finally fallen quiet. The gunfire was gone, the shouts of men carried away into the distance. Only the soft creak of the barn and the steady breath of horses filled the silence. Sarah sat on the wooden step outside Jack's house, her arms wrapped around her knees. The lantern light from inside spilled over her shoulders, casting a faint glow across her bruised face. She didn't cry. She hadn't been able to for a long time. Instead, she stared into the dark horizon, the same place Victor had disappeared when the marshals dragged him away. Jack stood a few feet back, leaning against the doorframe. His sleeve was torn where the bullet had grazed him, but he didn't bother to fix it. His eyes stayed on Sarah, watching the way her shoulders rose and fell unevenly with each breath. She was alive. That should have been enough. But he knew survival was only the beginning of a much harder fight. "You should eat," he said finally, his voice low. Sarah didn't look at him. "I can't." Her words were little more than air, shaky and thin. He didn't push. He knew the taste of grief, the way it stole your appetite and made every bite feel like ash. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering himself to sit on the step beside her. For a while, they sat without words, the night stretching around them, vast and unbroken. "You ever wonder," Sarah whispered after a long silence, "why people you trust the most can hurt you worse than strangers ever could?" Jack turned his head, studying the lines of her face, the raw honesty spilling from her. Every day, he admitted. His voice carried the weight of memory, his wife's smile, his boy's laughter, and the silence that followed when they were gone. Sometimes the knife that cuts deepest is the one handed to you by someone you love. Her throat tightened. She hugged her knees tighter, pressing her forehead against them. "Emily, she didn't fight for me. She just let it happen." Jack wanted to give her answers, to ease the ache, but he knew words couldn't untangle that kind of wound. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the badge he had carried earlier. The star gleamed faintly in the lantern's glow. He turned in his hand before setting it on the step between them. "You see this?" he asked quietly. Sarah lifted her head, just enough to glance at it. "I thought this was justice," Jack said. "I thought wearing it meant people would be safe. But it didn't stop men like Victor. It didn't save my family." His jaw clenched, his voice catching before he forced himself on. "I buried it because I thought I'd failed. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, I realized maybe it's not the badge that matters. Maybe it's just the choice to stand when someone else can't." Sarah stared at the star, her chest heavy with something she couldn't name. "You think I can stand again?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack turned toward her, his expression steady but gentle. "You already did. You pulled that rope. You faced him even when your knees were ready to give. You're stronger than you think. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, tears she hadn't expected slipped down her cheeks. They burned hot against the cool night air. She wiped at them quickly, ashamed, but Jack pretended not to notice. He just sat there, giving her space to feel without judgment. The prairie stretched wide and endless before them. Coyotes called in the distance. A gust of wind swept through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Sarah breathed it in, shaky but real, as if filling her lungs with something other than fear for the first time. After a long while, she asked, almost in a whisper, "What happens now?" Jack exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "The marshals will see Victor stand trial. Caleb too. But you—" He hesitated, then looked at her directly. "That choice is yours. You can go wherever you want when you're ready. You don't owe me or anyone else a thing." The words struck her harder than she expected. She didn't know him. She didn't belong to him. After everything she'd been through, after all the men who had spoken of contracts and ownership, his words felt like water on parched ground. She didn't know how to answer, so she simply whispered, "Thank you." Jack gave a small nod, then stood. "Get some rest. Tomorrow'll come fast." She watched him step inside, leaving the door open just enough for her to follow if she wanted. For a moment, she stayed on the step, staring out at the dark sky freckled with stars. Her body still ached, her soul still raw, but for the first time, the night didn't feel endless. Somewhere inside her, a tiny flame refused to go out. When she finally rose and walked inside, Jack had left a blanket folded on the small couch, along with a second cup of coffee that had gone cold. He sat at the table, silent, not looking at her as she curled up beneath the blanket. The silence was no longer pressing. It was something else now, something that almost felt like safety. And for Sarah Quinn, safety was the rarest thing of all. The following evening, the ranch was too quiet. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Sarah stood near the barn door, her hand gripping the rough wood frame as her heart hammered inside her chest. Jack had been preparing all day, moving with the calm precision of a man who knew what danger looked like and how to meet it. He had placed two rare stallions in the corral, their sleek coats shining like silver under the moonlight. A lantern hung from the gate, swaying gently with the wind, its glow meant as a signal for those hiding in the brush beyond and for the enemy who would soon arrive. Sarah's stomach twisted as she scanned the darkness. Jack had told her marshals he trusted were waiting in the fields, rifles ready, but knowing that didn't quiet the storm inside her. Every shadow seemed alive. Every rustle in the grass sounded like footsteps coming for her. And then she saw them, dark shapes moving at the far edge of the pasture, riders on horseback pressing hard through the night. Her breath caught. At the front rode Victor Crow, his cruel face carved sharp even in the dim light. Beside him was Caleb, the man she had once trusted like a brother, his hand holding reins with a confidence that made bile rise in her throat. And behind them, trailing as if pulled by invisible chains, rode Emily. Her sister's shawl clung to her shoulders, her wide eyes filled with fear, but still she followed her husband. The riders drew up to the ranch gate. Victor dismounted first, his boots crunching against the dirt as his voice boomed across the still air. "Where is she?" he barked, his tone carrying the weight of a man used to owning lives. Caleb stepped forward, holding a piece of paper high like a trophy. "We have a contract," he shouted. "She belongs to us." Sarah's blood burned hot, anger rushing through her veins. She wanted to scream that she was no man's property. No piece of paper could own her. But before she could move, Jack lifted his hand, steady as stone, warning her to stay silent. He walked forward slowly, his hat low over his eyes, his voice calm but edged with steel. "You come onto my land," he said evenly. "You bring lies and chains. But tonight, you walk into a trap of your own making." Victor's lip curled into a snarl. His hand twitched toward the gun at his belt, and then everything broke loose. In a sudden movement, Sarah yanked the rope loose from the corral gate. The stallions exploded forward, hooves thundering, dirt flying into the air as they bolted into the night. Chaos tore through Victor's men as the animals barreled past, wild and unstoppable. Gunfire cracked through the dark. One bullet ripped through Jack's sleeve, grazing his arm. Another sparked against the iron gate. Sarah ducked low, her heart pounding in her ears, the smell of gunpowder filling her nose. Out from the brush, the marshals surged in, rifles raised, voices shouting commands. "Drop your weapons! Hands in the air!" Victor cursed, firing wildly, but his men faltered under the sudden rush. Horses bucked and reared, throwing riders to the dirt. Caleb grabbed Emily's arm, trying to drag her back, but she pulled against him, her face torn between fear and the truth she had ignored for far too long. Jack stood firm in the chaos, his revolver steady, his eyes locked on Victor. For years, Jack had run from justice, burying his badge and the man he used to be. But tonight, he stood unshaken, a wall between the broken girl he had taken in and the man who had haunted his past. This wasn't only about Sarah anymore. It was about every woman Victor had stolen, every soul he had sold like cattle. Gunfire flared, echoing across the plain. The marshals pressed forward, shouting louder, overpowering the last of Victor's men. Dust and smoke filled the air. Horses screamed, boots pounded, voices collided in the night. And then, with a final rush, it was over. Victor lay face down in the dirt, his hands wrenched behind him, iron shackles biting into his wrists. Caleb was dragged forward too, his mouth spilling excuses that no one cared to hear. Emily stood frozen, her shawl slipping from her shoulders as her eyes locked on Sarah. For the first time, her sister's betrayal burned into her like fire, and Emily's lips trembled. "Forgive me," she whispered, her voice breaking. Sarah's chest tightened, the words hitting her harder than any fist ever could. She wanted to scream, to spit back the anger she carried. But when she looked into Emily's face, so broken, so hollow, she felt only the weight of choice pressing down. Finally, she gave a small nod. "I won't carry hate," she said softly, "but I won't let you chain me again either." The marshals tightened the shackles on Victor and Caleb, hauling them toward their horses to carry them away to the justice they had escaped for too long. Jack stood back, his revolver lowering slowly, his breath heavy. Something inside him shifted. He had not run this time. He had not turned away. He had stood his ground, and he had chosen to protect. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his past ease, just enough to let him breathe. As dawn began to edge over the horizon, Sarah stood beside him at the fence line. The prairie stretched wide and golden, the sunlight painting her bruised face in warm light. She turned to Jack, her voice soft but steady. "You saved me," she said. Jack shook his head. His voice was quiet, almost tender. "No, you saved yourself. I just refused to look away." The silence between them stretched, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was alive. Sarah's life was not over. It was only beginning again. And Jack Hale, the man who had once buried his badge in grief, understood now that justice wasn't about the star on his chest. It was about the choice to do what was right, even when no one else was watching. Morning crept slow across the prairie, painting the horizon in strokes of pale gold and gray. Sarah stirred awake beneath the blanket Jack had given her, the smell of coffee drifting through the small ranch house. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She almost expected to hear Emily humming in the kitchen or Caleb stomping through the doorway. But then the ache in her ribs reminded her. The bruises reminded her, and memory came rushing back like a flood. Jack was already at the stove, pouring steaming black coffee into a tin cup. He moved like a man who had been awake for hours, steady, quiet, carrying himself with a kind of heaviness Sarah couldn't quite name. He didn't look at her right away, and she was grateful. It gave her a chance to gather herself, to smooth back her tangled hair and try to push the fear out of her chest. "You slept," Jack said finally, his back still to her. "Some," she admitted, her voice hoarse. He turned and set the cup on the table. "Drink. You'll need it." Sarah slid out from under the blanket and sat at the table across from him. The first sip of the bitter coffee burned her throat, but it woke something inside her. She watched him in silence, his weathered hands resting on the wood, the faint scar across his knuckles catching her eye. She wondered what stories were buried in those scars, what battles he'd fought long before she stumbled onto his land. For a while, neither spoke. Then Sarah broke the silence. "They won't let it end here, will they?" Her voice shook, but her eyes didn't waver. Jack studied her face, then shook his head. "Victor's locked up, but men like him have roots. He's got others who owe him, some who'll want revenge." Her stomach clenched. "So even now, I'm not safe." Jack leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "Safer than you were. And safer still if you don't carry this weight alone." His words cut deeper than she expected. She wrapped her arms around herself, her shoulders hunching. "I don't know how to not carry it. It's all I feel when I close my eyes." The ropes. His hands. Emily turning her face away. Her voice cracked, tears threatening, but she bit them back. "It's like I'm still there." Jack's jaw tightened. He knew that feeling. The way ghosts lived inside you, replaying moments you couldn't change. "It doesn't vanish," he said softly. "You just learn how to walk with it without letting it crush you." Sarah looked at him, her brows furrowed. "And you? Have you learned that?" The question landed heavy. Jack stared at the coffee in his cup, the dark surface reflecting the faint glow of morning. "Some days," he said finally. "Other days, it still feels like the first night I lost them." Her eyes softened, the anger in her chest quieting for a moment. For the first time, she saw the man beneath the silence, the grief etched deep, the loss that shaped every line of his face. And in some strange way, it made her feel less alone. The sound of hooves echoed outside, faint but clear. Sarah's body stiffened, her hand gripping the edge of the table. Jack rose slowly, his movements calm, measured. He walked to the door and opened a crack. A rider trotted up the path, dust trailing behind. It was Marshall Bennett, the old friend Jack had sent word to. Jack stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Sarah pressed her ear toward the wood, straining to hear. Their voices were low, but the words carried enough weight to chill her. "Victor's being transported. Might not sit in a cell for long. Too many men still loyal." "Caleb," Jack's voice. "Locked up with him, but he'll talk. Men like him always do. He'll turn on Victor to save his own skin. Might give us names." Sarah pulled back from the door, her stomach twisting. Caleb would talk, she thought. He always did whatever it took to save himself. The thought of him bargaining his way out of justice made her chest ache with rage. When Jack came back inside, his face was unreadable. Sarah stared at him, searching for an answer he didn't give. "What happens if Victor walks free?" she asked. Jack sat down across from her, leaning forward, his voice low but certain. "Then I'll be waiting." She studied him, her throat tight. "Why? Why risk yourself for me? You don't even know me." Jack's eyes locked on hers, steady and unflinching. "Because someone should have been there when you needed them. Because I know what it feels like to scream for help and get silence back." He paused, his voice rough. "And because I'm tired of running from what's right." The room went still. Sarah's heart pounded, her breath shallow. For years she had been made to feel small, voiceless, less than human. Now, across this old wooden table, she heard something she thought she'd never hear again. Someone choosing her life over their own peace. She didn't speak. She couldn't. But deep in her chest, something fragile stirred. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. The afternoon sun was harsh, pouring down in waves that made the earth shimmer. Sarah sat on the porch with her knees drawn up, her chin resting against them. She had washed, changed into a clean dress Jack had found in an old trunk, but nothing could wash away the heaviness inside her. The world felt too wide, too open. Even with Victor locked up and Caleb in shackles, the weight of their betrayal clung to her skin like sweat. She kept hearing Emily's voice in her head. "Forgive me." Those two words echoed again and again, and each time, Sarah felt torn apart. She wanted to hate her sister, to let anger scorch the last thread between them. But blood was blood. Memories of laughter, of shared secrets as children, haunted her. How could the same woman who once braided her hair now stand silent while her husband sold her away? Jack walked up the steps, carrying a bucket of water from the well. He set it down and wiped his brow with his sleeve. His shirt clung to him with sweat, his movements steady, deliberate, as if the rhythm of chores kept him from drowning in thoughts. "You're quiet," he said gently, not looking at her right away. Sarah hugged her knees tighter. "I don't know what to feel anymore." Jack sat beside her, the boards creaking under his weight. "Feel what you feel. There's no wrong in it." She glanced at him, her eyes stinging. "Emily, she was supposed to be the one person who'd never let go of me. And yet she did. Do you know what it's like, Jack? To see the face you trusted most turn away from you." He didn't answer at first. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, far and steady. Finally, he spoke. "I do." Sarah studied him, the scarred lines in his face, the shadow in his eyes. "Your family?" Jack's jaw worked as he nodded slowly. "I trusted the law to protect them. Thought justice was enough. The night they were killed, I saw men I'd known for years walk away when they should have stood with me. Silence is its own kind of betrayal. Sarah, sometimes worse than the gun pointed at you." Her chest tightened. The hurt in his voice, quiet as it was, struck her harder than her own pain. He wasn't speaking like a lawman or a rancher. He was speaking like someone broken in the same way she was. The porch fell silent again. The prairie stretched out endless before them, cicadas buzzing in the heat. Sarah's voice was soft when it came again. "I don't know if I can forgive her." Jack's eyes turned toward her. Forgiveness isn't about letting her off the hook. It's about letting yourself breathe again. If you carry her betrayal every day, you let her own you still. The words settled heavy in Sarah's chest. She wanted to argue, but deep down she knew he was right. The chains weren't just the ropes Victor had tied around her wrists. They were also the memories that wrapped around her heart. That evening, the marshals returned with Emily in tow. She had begged to see her sister, saying she had left Caleb's side for good. Jack stood by the barn as they brought her forward, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Sarah stayed on the porch, her body rigid, every muscle tense. Emily stepped carefully, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. When her gaze found Sarah, she froze, guilt written across every line of her. "Sarah," Emily's voice cracked. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I obeyed Caleb, he would keep us safe. I was wrong. God, I was so wrong." Sarah's throat burned. She wanted to shout, to throw every bitter word she had bottled inside. But when she opened her mouth, only one came out. "Why?" Emily stepped closer, trembling. "Because I was afraid. Because I thought if I fought him, I'd lose everything. I didn't realize that in keeping myself safe, I was destroying you." Her voice broke. "I can't take it back. But I'm here now." Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. She stood slowly, her hands trembling at her sides. "You watched him sell me," she whispered. "You didn't even try." Emily's face collapsed. "I know." She dropped to her knees in the dirt, sobbing openly now. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even deserve to look at you. But please, please don't hate me forever." The sight of her sister kneeling, shaking, made Sarah's chest ache in a way she couldn't name. Anger screamed inside her, but so did love, the kind that had never died, even when it should have. She felt torn down the middle, ripped between fury and longing. Jack stepped forward, laying a hand on Sarah's shoulder. His voice was calm, grounding. "You don't have to decide tonight." Sarah's breath came ragged. She turned her eyes away from Emily and whispered, "I can't hate you, but I can't forget either." Emily's sobs filled the air, raw and desperate. Sarah's heart felt like glass, sharp edges cutting her with every beat. She didn't embrace her sister. She didn't turn her back either. She just stood there, caught in the storm of love and betrayal, of blood and broken trust. That night, long after the marshals had taken Emily away, Sarah lay awake on the couch. Jack sat at the table with the lantern low, sharpening a knife, though his eyes kept drifting toward her. They were two people bound by different wounds, both trying to find their way through the wreckage of what had been taken from them. For the first time, Sarah wondered if healing wasn't about erasing the pain, but about carrying it together. Days passed slower than Sarah expected. The ranch was quiet most of the time, the air filled only with the sound of horses shifting in their stalls or the wind brushing through the tall grass. Jack worked as he always did, steady and patient, and Sarah tried to help when her body allowed. She carried buckets of water, brushed down the horses, swept the porch. The chores were simple, but each task gave her something she hadn't felt in weeks: control. Sometimes she caught herself pausing, just holding the brush or staring at the horizon, her mind drifting back to the wagon, the ropes, the hands that grabbed her. Fear rushed in quick, like a storm. Her breath would stutter. Her knees would weaken. In those moments, Jack didn't ask questions. He didn't try to fix it. He simply stood near, his presence quiet but strong, and somehow that was enough to keep her steady. One afternoon, while the sun sank low, Sarah leaned against the fence, watching a colt run wild in the pasture. Its legs kicked high, its mane flying in the wind. For the first time since she had come to Jack's ranch, she smiled without thinking. Jack noticed. "Strong little one," he said, stepping up beside her. "Not afraid of falling," Sarah replied softly. Jack gave her a sidelong glance. Maybe it knows falling's just part of learning. His words settled in her chest, heavier than she expected. She thought about all the times she had fallen, all the times she thought she couldn't get back up. Maybe she wasn't broken beyond repair. Maybe she was just learning how to stand again. That evening, Sarah sat across from Jack at the table. The lantern light softened the sharp lines of his face. She studied him for a while before speaking. "You never asked me what I want," she said. Jack looked up. "Because it's yours to say, not mine to ask." She hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket draped over her lap. "I don't know where to go. Emily, she's still my sister, but I don't trust her. Caleb will never mean anything but pain. And Victor," her voice faltered at his name, "even locked away, I still feel him behind me." Jack leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. "You don't have to decide tonight. Or tomorrow. You stay here as long as you need." Her throat tightened. No one had given her a choice in so long that the freedom itself felt strange. "And you? Why carry all this with me? You've already lost so much." Jack's eyes dropped to his hands. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then he said quietly, "Because I know what it feels like when no one stays. And I'm done letting silence win." Sarah swallowed hard. She had no words, but inside her something small and fragile warmed, like a candle flame fighting the dark. The next day, Marshal Bennett returned. His face was grim, his voice steady. "Victor's trial will be messy. He's got men trying to buy his way free. Caleb's already spilling names, but it might not be enough. We'll need witnesses." Jack's jaw tightened. She's not standing alone in that courtroom. Sarah froze. "Courtroom." The marshal nodded. "If you tell your story, the judge won't be able to turn away. The law needs your voice." Her heart raced. The thought of standing in front of strangers, speaking out what had been done to her, made her chest burn with fear. She shook her head, whispering, "I can't." Jack leaned toward her, his voice steady but soft. "You already did the hardest part, Sarah. You lived through it. Speaking it is just the echo." Her eyes filled, her body trembling. "What if they don't believe me?" "Then I'll believe you," Jack said, his tone firm. "And the marshal will. And every man Victor has hurt before. Truth doesn't lose because someone doubts it. It loses when it's silenced." Sarah lowered her gaze, her hands shaking in her lap. She didn't answer, but the words stayed with her long after the marshal left. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling while the crickets sang outside. She thought about the colt running in the field, about the way Jack had said falling was just part of learning. She thought about Emily kneeling in the dirt, about her own voice whispering she couldn't hate, but she couldn't forget. Maybe she wasn't ready yet. Maybe the scars would always stay. But for the first time, she began to wonder if her story could be more than pain, if it could become proof. Proof that she had survived. Proof that she could not be bought or silenced again. She turned onto her side, pulling the blanket close. Across the room, Jack sat at the table, the faint glimmer of the old badge resting near his hand. Neither of them spoke, but the silence was no longer empty. It was full of something both of them had thought lost forever: hope. The courthouse smelled of dust and wood polish. The walls were high, the benches filled with townsfolk whispering as Sarah walked in. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of her plain dress, every step heavy with dread. Jack walked beside her, his wide shoulders blocking the stares of curious eyes. He didn't touch her, didn't try to guide her. He just walked there, steady and calm, a silent promise that she wouldn't face this moment alone. Victor Crow sat in chains at the front, his dark eyes cold but sharp, like he was still trying to own the room even with shackles biting into his wrists. Caleb sat near him, thinner than before, his face pale, his mouth moving fast as he muttered excuses to anyone who would listen. Emily sat in the back row, her hands twisting in her lap, her gaze never leaving Sarah. The judge called for silence. The trial began. Sarah's heart pounded when they called her name. For a moment, she froze. Every eye turned to her, waiting. Her legs shook as she stood, but Jack caught her gaze, giving the smallest nod. She stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice quivered at first. "My name is Sarah Quinn." The sound echoed in the room, too big, too heavy. But she didn't stop. She told them about Caleb's promise, about Emily's silence, about the night she was dragged away, about the wagon, the ropes, the bruises that still marked her skin. Each word felt like ripping open an old wound, but once the words left her mouth, she felt lighter. At one point, her throat closed and she couldn't breathe. Victor smirked like he had already won. But then she looked at Jack, steady, unshaken, and the strength returned. Her voice rose, stronger this time. "I was treated like property, like nothing, but I am not nothing, and no one else should ever be made to feel that way again." The courtroom was silent when she finished. Even the judge leaned forward, his eyes soft but firm. The marshal presented the evidence, the ropes, the torn clothes, the doctor's record of her injuries. Piece by piece, the truth weighed heavy against Victor, and this time, the law could not turn away. When the verdict came, guilty, the air in the room shifted. Victor's jaw tightened, but he was dragged away in chains, his power stripped from him at last. Caleb followed, his protest drowned out by the clanging of the shackles. Sarah sat down slowly, her chest heaving, her eyes stinging with tears. She had spoken. She had been heard. For the first time in months, she felt like she had taken back something that was stolen from her. Outside, the sun was setting, the sky glowing orange and pink across the wide prairie. Sarah stood on the courthouse steps, the cool air brushing her face. Emily approached slowly, her eyes swollen from crying. "I don't expect forgiveness," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "But I will spend the rest of my life trying to make right what I let happen." Sarah's heart twisted. She stared at her sister for a long moment, then nodded softly. "You'll have to live with what you chose. But so will I, and I choose not to let it own me anymore." Emily broke down in tears, but Sarah turned toward Jack, her shoulders straighter than they had been in weeks. She walked down the steps with him at her side, the weight on her chest lighter, her steps steadier. As they reached the horses, Sarah looked at Jack, her voice quiet but steady. "You were right." Speaking, it was just the echo. The hardest part was surviving. Jack gave a small nod. "And you did." The wind picked up across the prairie, carrying the scent of earth and grass. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, breathing it in. When she opened them, the world looked different. Not safe, not simple, but possible. Jack swung into the saddle of his horse, pausing as Sarah mounted beside him. The faint gleam of the old badge hung from his belt, not hidden this time, but not worn on his chest either. He caught her glance and gave the smallest smile. "I don't need to star to know what's right. Neither do you." Together, they rode out from town, the horizon wide open before them. And the lesson hung clear in the air, unspoken but true. Betrayal can break you, but it doesn't have to define you. Family can fail, trust can shatter, and grief can hollow a man out, but healing begins the moment you refuse to let the past chain you down. Justice isn't only about courts or badges. Sometimes it's about standing up, choosing not to look away, and believing that your worth can never be measured in what others try to take. As the sun dipped low and the prairie stretched endless before them, Sarah carried that truth inside her, and Jack carried it too. Two souls scarred by loss, but no longer alone, no longer silent. And for the first time, both of them felt something they thought they had buried forever, hope strong enough to start again.